Welcome to another episode of the Devil's Rest Book Club. I am the heretic in prison, Cameron, and with me today, as always, is the Cathar, who is torturing me until I see the light, Drew. Drew, how are we doing this week?
We're doing great this week, and we'll be covering chapters 14 through 16 of the first book of series, Empire of Silence, this week. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so the last we left Hadrian, he has gone through and seen the most harrowing experience of his life, where his father figure has now been scourged in front of the entire palace and presumably for all of Maidwa to see, and is now being sent off into exile, and he's having to deal with the repercussions of that. After, having basically Hadrian is in the lowest place that he's been in the book, right? I mean, even lower, I'd argue, than when he was beaten up. As he's seen Gibson, an old man, tortured ruthlessly in front of everybody he knows. But we begin this week with chapter 14, Fear is a Poison. So Hadrian starts off this section of the book by mourning, right? Isolating himself. Not only is his father figure and motherly figure too, because we know that Gibson nurtures him a lot, gone out of his life. The only person that's broken through that veil, that substance, the membrane, I think he called it in the last chapters of the book, from servant to friend / mentor. He has isolated himself in his room. He's a prisoner in his own house, and the only plan that he had to get off of Delos and not join the Chantry is now gone. And the book, the chapter ends with the book, The King with 10,000 Eyes, which had that letter that Gibson had written for the Athenaeum, for the Scholiast, is gone.
Yeah.
So he's SOL.
He not only doesn't know what the plans were for how he was actually going to get off planet, he actually, even if he could at this point, without the letter, can't do anything once he gets off planet. It's essentially at this point in the story, he's at wit's end, not just because of what's happened to Gibson, but because he doesn't have a pathway forward to being a Scholiast anymore. He's just been completely cut off from his father figure and his supposed future as well at the same time.
So again, we see Hadrian in this void-like state where his future is so uncertain, he doesn't know what's going to happen to him. And the reason that he can't just forge another letter, he has to have a Scholiast write it, I think is built into the world, is Scholiasts have this cipher that they write these letters. It has to be written by a Scholiast, and it's this cipher or this code that they write in as a letter of introduction. That's the only way that you get in, as far as we know so far. And without that, Hadrian cannot live his childhood dream of being the Indiana Jones of Scholiasts.
Yeah.
So he's now resigned himself to following what is laid out for him and joining the Chantry. He mourns the idea that he's going to become the thing that he hates the most. We get another notice here that Hadrian mentions that he's lived a tragically long life. So we're getting these indications that even among Palatines, Hadrian has this especially long life. And he mentions long enough to know the evil they do and why. So narrator Hadrian has learned more about the Chantry in his life and basically has come to the conclusion that despite the fact that all they talk about is faith, they absolutely believe in nothing, right? They do nothing. They add no value. They are purely materialists. And that's why, narrator Hadrian up to this point, I think, has mentioned that he was too hard on religion in the past or whatever, because all he knew was the Chantry. But this is his real the Chantry's bad.
Yeah.
I know more about the Chantry now than I did back then, and they still are worse than I had initially thought.
And he has this great line describing them, which is that they believed in nothing. They committed that ultimate and atheistic error, thinking that there is only power and that civilization arises only from the abuse of the innocent by the powerful. It's really a great description of, essentially, it's interesting that he's accusing a supposed religious institution of an atheistic error. It's just that the idea is that, you sort of, the only dynamic you have is crushing people underneath the weight of power. And all there is just power games, and therefore you kind of just have to play the power game to win rather than having an actual ethical framework to play from. It's interesting. There's commentary that sort of feels like not just narrator Hadrian talking, but almost maybe Rockio talking through this character as well here, where it's like it's essentially a condemnation of this sort of view of the world and our own world about viewing the world as just a function of power dynamics or something like that. It's a great thing. It's a great way to criticize the Chantry this way. It's great.
And it's also interesting too. This is another part of the House of Cards that
Yeah.
Alistair lives under, that a lot of these Palatines live under. We've mentioned before the form of obedience out of fear of pain.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same form of obedience, even at the religious scale, which you would think would be further up if we're taking that as a sliding scale. Think that'd be further up on the morality scale than it is. But narrator Hadrian is letting us know that, oh, they have the same ethic that my father did. And as part of that, my dad was trying to play me as a pawn in order to further his own schemes and to protect himself from hedging his bets and hedging his risk against this institution. Now, one of the interesting parts is he and then his brother Crispin are prepping to go leave from Devil's Rest to spend basically a last sort of summer vacation at his mom's vacation home at Hespeda. And they're waiting for a shuttle, and Crispin, we're going to talk a lot about Crispin in this episode and the next episode.
Yeah.
But Crispin clearly comes in here and is trying to diffuse this situation by making casual comments. He says, man, it's been
Things have been
interesting times.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a mess here right now, right? He says,
this comment caught me so off guard on a reread. It's like,
yeah.
I was just like, whoa.
Understatement of understatements.
It's also just like, I don't know, because we have perception of Hadrian of Crispin, or Hadrian's perception. Yeah. Crispin. And this comment, it feels like it's spoken by a different character than the way that Crispin has been described by Hadrian. Because it's not like arrogant or brash. It's kind of like this like semi-awkward connection moment where he's like, man, things have been kind of crazy, Hadrian, right? Like, yeah, it's like total like regular brother feeling to me in this moment. It sort of hammers home this idea that we are truly seeing Hadrian at this age thinking about his brother at this time in his very biased teenage-ish way, and not like a objective characterization of him, not an omniscient figure describing Crispin's inner monologue. So, and we start to really lean into that.
Narrator Hadrian too also still believes these things, right? Otherwise he would correct it in the past. And I think he does a little bit as we get further into the chapter. He talks a little bit. We see the narrator come in and add some commentary where there isn't. But you're 100% right. And we've been hinted some of this information in the past, right? When Crispin speaks out, when they're talking about Alistair, about the potential for Hadrian and for Gibson to go talk to the guild factionaries and fix the situation. And Crispin says, Dad, you should let him do it. It's a good idea. He's good at it. Right. That was the first sort of like, this doesn't align with the characterization that we've had with Crispin so far. And this is another one too, of just like, he's trying to connect or trying to just talk to Hadrian as a person. It feels like Hadrian has nothing, wants nothing to do with him.
I feel in these passages where we're seeing these interaction, it feels like I'm like watching Hadrian from the outside, and I'm like, bro, like he's trying to be nice. I mean, he's like a young kid. I mean, he's a teenager too, and he's just trying to connect with you. But Hadrian at that age just doesn't get it. It's a remnant. I'm sure it's how parents feel looking down at their teenage children arguing with each other. It's like, guys, like calm down. It's really good. It's coming through much more on a reread than it did the first time. And I'm glad I'm catching it this time because it's actually one of the more interesting parts of this part of the narrative.
The first read was definitely the villain, right? He was Alistair 2.0. Yeah. A brute. Like you without going as deep as we are, you really do just get that sense if you're just taking it word for word or taking Hadrian as 100% accurate, even though he's told us, right? And he will tell us more that this is not an unbiased account. But yeah, Crispin is definitely the most interesting character in this set of the chapters in this book. As he's trying to console Hadrian, and they're talking about Hadrian's future, about going and joining the Chantry, which they will talk about a lot. He's trying to give him the bright side, it feels like, of like, hey, you're going to go see the Pale. And if you look at it from his perspective,
Yeah.
Crispin always imagined that Hadrian would be the one who gets Devil's Rest. Like, this is the first inkling that we're getting of that. He'll hammer it home further later. But Crispin is essentially, telling Hadrian the things that he would appreciate if that were him, because he thought he would have a similar path. Like, he thought he'd be the one who would be going off planet or doing the duty of the second child in this sort of patriarchal relationship.
Yeah.
It really gives us this indication of the grass is always greener on the other side. So Crispin's like, hey, you're going to be on the front lines of this. You're going to be dropping atomics on the Pale, right? Like, it's going to be awesome. And Hadrian's basically like, I'm going to be in an anagnost's cell for years. That's not going to
Studying
be as nice.
and doing boring. It's interesting because, prior to this moment as well, it's giving us some sort of insight into like maybe how is Crispin personally interpreting this conflict that we've been really only seeing from Hadrian's side. I really hadn't considered until we start really getting more into the details here that it's like, oh, like Crispin also probably has feelings about where he would like to be. And maybe Crispin is feeling stuck by his duty and station just like Hadrian is.
Yeah.
And not only that, like from his perspective, he might be like, dude, like I feel like you're going to get to go do this important thing. You get to fight this war now. And that's really cool. That's like heroic. That's this thing that we're supposed to do as humanity. And like, you get to go off and do that while I'm stuck on this stupid rock. So like, I'm glad that this is explored here because it sort of breaks the conflict wide open because we're at least allowed not to hear Crispin's thoughts, but at least to hear his words without Hadrian butting in between the interpretation for us and as readers. So it's we get to examine the evidence ourselves this way.
Just wanted to make one note. I'm going to bring up names a lot on this episode, but an anagnost is in the lexicon is the initiate in the chantry's clergy, but the analogy of the word is from, I think it's from Greek, that says it's a slave who reads aloud, right? And so this is just a part of the chantry's hierarchy within itself. We know that there are chanters, right, within the chantry, but the first is like a slave who reads aloud, which is just interesting word choice on Rockio's part. Going back to what you were saying about Crispin and this, like, his feeling that he's stuck on this rock, we also get the indication in this conversation that Crispin believes what the chantry says. Like, Crispin is closer to Crispin buys what the chantry is selling. He's friends with Severn. Like, he's part of the chantry.
He's like swimming in the culture in a way that Hadrian is not. Like, Hadrian is this example for us as the reader of like, what does it look like when this he's completely distinct from the culture. He's so countercultural. It's almost comical sometimes. But Crispin is what like a semi-decent dude for the time within the culture would feel like. Because he's just this like 15-year-old kid or something. He's just buying the stuff and drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit because he's like, frankly, we all would. If we were in this situation, the idea that we would be Hadrian is probably very minimal. We'd be more like a Crispin character, if anything. And he's just like, yeah, you get to go fight this evil thing and you get to do this stuff. And these are the beliefs we have. And it's just in the middle of it, like a regular person would be. I'm glad that we are given Crispin as an example to compare Hadrian to.
Foil, yeah.
Yeah, because I don't think that Crispin's like fault is that he's like evil or wrong or anything like that. I just think he's swimming in the culture alongside everybody else, not knowing that maybe there's more going on, like Hadrian feels there is.
And for his faults, right? Like, all that we know that we've seen, at least in the societal norms and mores that exist in the palace today, the only thing that Crispin has done wrong is mention the fact that the Pale eat brains or something at dinner, right? For all intents and purposes, he is the ideal Palatine son up to this point. He trains, he meets with the people, he goes to Colosso.
Mm-hmm.
And for all of Hadrian's talk about how he's a brute and how he's terrible, I think he's really just lumping him in with Alistair more than giving Crispin credit for being who Crispin is. Although he is more like Alistair than Hadrian is.
Mm-hmm.
Hadrian is more like Liliana than Crispin is. Crispin is not Alistair by any stretch of the imagination.
And Hadrian, not Liliana. They're definitely their children, but they're distinct people for sure.
But Hadrian's given us this indication that they are the exact. He lumps them in with Alistair so much, and what we're hearing from Crispin doesn't necessarily align 100% with that.
Yeah.
We've talked about the idea that Hadrian has this sort of childish view of Scholius and traveling,
Yeah.
and going to be Simeon the Red. And I think we've heard the story of Simeon the Red, like basically this John Carter of Mars that goes in and liberates the Xenobites and makes friends with them and becomes like a leader among their people and, whatever, right? That's the ethic that Hadrian thinks is heroic. From Crispin's perspective, what he thinks is heroic in his sort of childish view is going and fighting the Pale, right? He wants to be on the front line and dropping bombs on the Pale and like saving humanity. That's the ideal that he sort of thinks is this heroic figure. And we're seeing a contrast of that here, especially when Hadrian then looks at Crispin and says, I wish we'd make peace with the aliens, right? This is the first indication, I think Hadrian has even said in the book, that Hadrian wants and believes at this point that the Cielsen are a people that we could do diplomacy with, right?
Yeah.
And this is, to Crispin, world-shatteringly shocking, right? Like he just has not a response for this initially. And for Crispin being as loud and as boisterous as he's made out to be, him not saying something here and taking a pause when Hadrian says this is really strange. Hadrian then says, hey, I mean, the Cielsen are the only other civilization that we've met that have been able to fare in space. Like all these other Xenobites that we've met are isolated to like their systems, their planets. The Cielsen are the only ones that have gone like out of solar systems. And shouldn't they, by virtue of that, is there some virtue in there that because they have been able to do that they deserve a place in the universe as well?
Yeah. And I think, to Hadrian's credit here, I think that if we just pause for a second and think about how we would think as a culture now about alien life, I mean, I think Hadrian is actually exactly where like Earth would be at this point in time. There's a lot of people that may be scared, but there also be a lot of people like, do we really need to like go to war with this other advanced civilization? It's just like this other group, like, why don't we try to have a peace negotiate? Like, this isn't out of bounds in terms of a conversation maybe we as a culture would be having, although there would be a lot of people scared and all that, but it's certainly out of bounds for this culture and what's going on. I would also say that it's interesting to hear Hadrian talk this way, given what we know about the start of the book, of him describing ending a war with this alien race, but starting by feeling like we should form some kind of peace relationship with the Pale. There's something is going on here between the start of the book and here that we don't know yet as readers at this point in the story.
What we do know for sure, based on what you're saying right now, right, is the way that the war ended was not diplomacy. The way that the war ended was Hadrian eating the sun. Yep. And then them segmenting that, they're doing enough damage to the Cielsen that they could put them in ghettos.
Right.
That's the way that the war ended.
Right.
So we know that this like ideal does not come to pass.
Right. So what happened is the sort of question mark we're given as the reader. Does Hadrian change? Does he get different information? What goes on between now and then that this doesn't make sense anymore? Right. That's the big question mark we're left with. It's going to be one of the biggest question marks we're left with, especially at this point in the story, because all that we've had happen is we've talked about the Pale. If we haven't seen the Pale at this point in the story, this is another one of these drip fed things where we have this big question mark and we're not going to get an immediate answer. But it's going to be a huge pin that we're putting in this because this is a huge part of Hadrian's motivation. Obviously, Crispin immediately spitting back at him like, this is heresy, dude. Like, you can't just say we're making peace with the man-eating alien race.
The equivalent would be like saying an American during World War II saying, I want to make peace with the Nazis as they are conquering Europe, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the equivalent.
It's even worse than that.
Yeah, it is. Because the Nazis didn't eat people. Yeah.
The Nazis didn't eat people. They also were human at some level, although evil in action. These, as purported by what Hadrian knows at this point in the story, by the dominant culture, are a like roaming, man-eating,
cannibalistic,
Viking-esque, like
space orc,
other species. There's almost nothing to latch onto.
Predator.
Yeah. Like that out of our wheelhouse. But he nonetheless thinks, I think that there's more going on here. It may be due to his distrust of, the chantry. He's already has this experience with distrusting authority, the common narrative, all the authority figures in his life, whether the chantry or his father. All of the authority is disappointing and feels like they have bad values. So why not? Why wouldn't there be misinformation or bad values guiding the relationship with the Pale, right? It's not a far leap given his life experience. So interesting. Really great. There is then like the introduction of like Hadrian saying that he wants to be a scholiast to Crispin. Like they're actually openly discussing it now. I always feel so silly every time Hadrian says, I want to be a scholiast. It feels so childish to me every time he says it in the story. And one thing that jumped out at me was that Crispin like focuses on this idea that I think actually is a pretty good critique, which is that he's like, isn't it kind of weird that the scholiasts like control their emotions in this way? Like, isn't that not very like human? And Hadrian doesn't hear it in the story because he like wants to be this thing. But as the reader, I'm like, I think actually Crispin is onto something here, because I don't think that the things that Hadrian likes about the scholiasts are actually the things that make them scholiasts. Like the scholiast in his life with Gibson, who's compassionate towards him and treats him like a son, that's not very scholiast-ish. And it's interesting because even Hadrian is this like emotional person. So I actually think Crispin levels a pretty interesting piece of feedback here that Hadrian obviously can't hear at this age, but I actually think is pretty poignant. I think it's a good point.
Well, and to be honest, it might be in a weird way Rocchio's commentary on Stoic philosophy, right? At least in the way that Hadrian views it, and Crispin calling out and saying, yeah, I know this is a tool that they use. I'm not an idiot, but like, you don't think that it's weird? And from our perspective too, if you are to just, you as a therapist can answer this. Here's my question to you. Would you read somebody who just shuts down their emotions in this way as somebody who is emotionally intelligent, or somebody that is a complete person, or is a complete like emotionally mature person to have to shut down your emotions?
It's a great question. I actually love this question. So there's this interesting dichotomy, I think, between scholiast philosophy, or I should say Stoic philosophy, in truth.
It's the same.
Yeah, it's and modern cognitive behavioral therapy. So there's a sort of a relationship between these things here. There's some Eastern philosophy influences as well. Roughly what you get from the camp of Stoicism, Stoic philosophy, some Eastern philosophies like Buddhism and stuff like that is essentially that the thing that causes us issues as human beings is like our reactions to things. You might get some like Buddhist kind of stuff of like, oh, attachments are the issue. If I have an attachment to the idea of being a successful person, then I open myself up to the disappointment of not being successful, for example. So you have an attachment to a thing, therefore I can generate disappointment about a thing. Stoicism is like a thing, I react to the thing, and the way I think about the thing may generate excess emotion or something like that. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy, which is started as cognitive theory, I believe the guy who founded it is named Aaron Beck, essentially posits that human suffering, mental illness comes from distorted thoughts about the world, essentially. But I think the key part here is that this theory that's sort of more modern, I'm not as familiar with the details of Stoic philosophy, they may have room for this, but the thing I like about cognitive behavioral therapy is that emotion itself is not viewed as a negative thing. What's viewed as a negative thing is the distortion of thought that creates excess negative emotion that is mismatched from reality. So the idea is essentially, if I have a thought about, let's say I get into a car wreck or something like that, and my instantaneous thought is my life is over. What's happening now is my brain is telling me to respond to the idea that my life is over. So I'm like 10 out of 10 upset. If I had an alternative thought, which is like, this is a really bad situation, but I'm going to be okay, I might be like a 7 out of 10 upset. And the discrepancy there means like I'm suffering more in one situation than I should be, because my life actually literally isn't over. And so the idea is that I'm experiencing excess negative emotion, not that I should feel no negative emotion or no emotion at all. And so when I'm thinking about healthy emotion, what I'm thinking about is like realistic, responsive to reality emotion. There's also this supposition, I think, built into some Stoic philosophy or even some Buddhist philosophy is that like that negative emotions are somehow like bad. In a reality, I think the temptation to push down, suppress, and pretend we don't have negative emotions or detach from so many things that we can no longer experience negative emotion takes away a lot of like the parts of being human that are like the cool things about being human. There is no happiness at the birth of a child without the risk of losing it. And you could say, I will remove all attachments, but then we don't get to experience like the part of human, which
The
is
joy.
really cool, the joy. And so from a Christian perspective, there are a lot of like people who are Christians who are actually a little bit anti-Stoic because in order to remove oneself from attachments and to separate from emotions would imply that you would have to separate oneself from a particular kind of life, one that is in relationship and attached to other people, which obviously from a Christian Rockio perspective is something that would be required to have like a sort of Christian worldview and stuff. So I think this is Rockio saying essentially that there is something inhuman about it if you push it too far. There's value in the idea that we should manage emotion and have realistic emotion, but to cut all emotion away would be to cut the things away that make us human. So that's what I was saying a very long way about
No,
saying it.
it's very good. And to your point, right? The thing that Hadrian enjoys about, or the ideas that Hadrian has about Scotus in particular, are primarily colored by his relationship with Gibson.
Yeah.
And Gibson is a good synthesis in most cases. And even we get weird ones, right? Where like Hadrian says something funny and Gibson has to suppress a laugh, right? Like who wants to suppress laughter? It's not a good thing to do that. We would not identify that as this thing. But what makes Gibson an interesting character is he is not, I think I mentioned this before, he's like a Qui-Gon Jinn. He doesn't follow all the rules of the Jedi all the time, but we love him when he doesn't because it means that he sees the deeper, fuller picture, right? There's a fuller aspect to it. And I think Crispin, to your point, is 100% pointing out the idea that this, if you take it to the extremes that we see these people do it, it is weird. It's not human.
Yeah. I also think that it's interesting that I think Crispin lives in the moment much more. And
100%.
so, and therefore feels the connection with emotions being necessary. Hadrian often lives in his head and is therefore, I think, less inclined to realize the importance of this because he spends so much time up here thinking about things instead of experiencing in the way that Crispin does. Now, there are advantages to that because I think Hadrian has sort of pushed himself to the point where he might have some genuine moral insights because he's thinking about things instead of just living through them. But it's a good dichotomy of the just present living person who maybe misses some stuff versus the person who thinks too much and then maybe misses some stuff in a different way. So
what a comment that you had made in a previous episode too, that Hadrian is probably high in trait openness, right? Crispin is not, and Crispin is not a creative person. And we see that in this conversation when he's like shocked at the fact that Hadrian's, even thinking about the idea that he wants to make peace with the aliens.
There's a whole other section of philosophy around purity and discuss sensitivity and all this stuff and sort of generates almost like xenophobia, maybe the wrong word for alien.
Yeah.
But like
Xenobite phobia.
Xenobite phobia. The idea is, like you've got some, roughly speaking, more conservative-ish moral intuitions that may protect oneself in like a state of nature or something like that. Crispin seems much more in that camp of like, hey, listen, like we should probably be careful with the man-eating aliens because they're kind of trying to eat us. And, over here, Hadrian is just so open-minded and accepting that he's just trying to find the way to conciliatory like peace and stuff like that. So
and to put a bow on this discussion about Crispin in particular and his morals, right? Like he's a 15-year-old kid too. That's something that we're not giving him enough credit for, but he has some insights that we as the reader on this deep read through can say, he's got a point, right? Like sometimes he says the quiet part out loud, but he sees the world the way that it is. And it's very different than the world that Hadrian is describing to us. So we have to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah. I also think it's good to point out here that narrator Hadrian does point out that he does see that Crispin was trying to be conciliatory in this moment. Like as he's writing this, he's like, I didn't get this when I was a kid, but I see it now. I couldn't see it then, but I do see it looking back. So this is not just us noticing it. This is narrator Hadrian saying, "Hey, pay attention. This is happening. I didn't get it at the time, but it is there." Yeah.
And it's a dynamic that we will continue to talk about for the next few episodes. Crispin and Hadrian continue talking about this, and Hadrian cannot keep his foot out of his mouth as he falls to the bait that Crispin says that, he was talking to Severn, one of the chantry, second in command to UCB or something like that. So pretty high up in the chantry, probably their like pastor, right? They're the person that Crispin is interacting with the most, calling the Scholiasts heretics. Like he thinks that the chantry believed that Scholiasts are all heretics. And then the discussion turns to Hadrian thinking that the religion of the Holy Terror Chantry is a crock of shit. But we also get an insight for the first time spelled out what the belief system actually is. So the Holy Terror Chantry believes that the earth sacrificed herself, like the earth, the planet, is this motherly, deified figure in order to inspire humanity to travel the stars, and that Mother Earth will return to redeem humanity's sin, right? Like this sort of Christ figure that will like come back to rid the sins of humanity in the future. But it was necessary for Earth to sacrifice herself in order for humans to get off planet and to populate the stars, which is very mythological and very interesting.
Yeah.
Tracks a lot with historical myth and things like that, and has some elements of Christianity, the redemption side of it. But Hadrian's like, it's a planet, Crispin, right? Like it's not going to come back. It's gone.
Yeah.
And clearly this makes Crispin and the people that are even around him as they're getting into the shuttle, right? Very uncomfortable that Hadrian is making these statements.
It feels like this crossed a line that even previous statements Hadrian had made had not. Like that's my feeling in this moment, because it's like there's like, I think something not good, obviously, about talking positively of the Pale. This feels like a step far and beyond that, of like denying openly like the state religion, almost, like where it's like you have like said something that you are literally, you can't utter that and not get serious repercussions. The entire room reacts. Like this isn't like just a inappropriate comment over dinner comment. This, it feels even worse than that.
Yeah, I think it mentions that one of the soldiers like makes a warning sign the moment that Hadrian like says
like
this.
literally like, oh my
like,
god, yeah, like he cannot say that.
This guy right here.
Yeah.
And then Crispin says to him, you really can't say that, right? Like they're gonna throw you to the Cathars, like that old bitch of a tutor that we had, which Hadrian gets pissed at.
It hurts to even read.
Yeah,
it hurts to read.
But a Cathar, I found interesting. This is a little world building. The names matter, man. They really do.
Yeah.
A Cathar was in the lexicon, the surgeon torturers of the chantry. So they're the ones, like the guy that came out and sliced Gibson's nose was a Cathar, right? These sort of torturers, which I think is actually a callback to potentially a Book of the New Sun, right? And the
Shadow of the Torturer. Yeah.
A little bit. But the etymology of the name Cathar comes from a dualist pseudo-Gnostic sect in France, in northern Italy, in the 12th through the 14th century. So they were labeled as heretics by the Catholic Church very early on because they believed in something very different than Christianity. They sort of took a similar view to the Gnostics in that they believed that the material world and everything in the material world is bad. So they believed that there was a good God who lived in the spiritual realm, who created heaven, and there was a bad God of this age, this Satan sort of figure who ruled the material world. And they sort of based it on 2 Corinthians 4:4, which says, see the light of the gospel, the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. So their belief was like humans have angelic souls trapped within their material flesh bodies.
Yeah.
And the only way to escape that was to deny everything in the material, similar to Buddhism in this respect, a little bit in terms of the material world.
Yeah.
But to deny everything in the material world. And not only that, they believed that Jesus did not have a physical incarnation, death, or resurrection. So this is a very heretical view
Yeah.
in Christianity, but it's a very interesting dichotomy between that and
Yeah.
what ends up becoming the religion down the line.
For those who are not Christians or not deep into religious philosophy, the Christian view is that like the material, the body, and the fact that human beings are embodied, not just a detached soul, is actually central to the philosophy of Christianity. And it's, why like a God would come down in a physical form. Like there's all sorts of stuff about the body being very central to the faith. So the idea that like the material, the body being like some kind of lie is like a complete inversion of it's not like a small theological difference. Like it's completely different than a regular Christian philosophy. So it's very, very heretical, like in every way, shape, or form.
100%. Like this, at least in the Christian philosophical standpoint, this does
Yeah.
not jibe with traditional Christianity. And in particular, too, the Cathars, this religious group, did not have a Trinitarian view, too. So not only did they deny the material world, but they also denied the idea
Trinity.
of the traditional Trinity that the church has held for thousands of years at this point. But it's I bring it up to contrast it with the idea that Gibson had brought up. It's also a condemnation. This hammers home the idea that the chantry makes this sort of atheistic mistake, right? Because Gibson brings up that the material world, like the fact that people are able to live thousands of light years away from the pale, like that's a beautiful thing. Like he talks about the beauty of the world before he gets scourged, right? That creation itself is beautiful. Whereas in the chantry, the Cathar is the name of the surgeon torturer, who's like a high level or higher level person in the chantry. And that harkens back to this idea the material world is bad. So it draws a fine line between like Gibson's, as far as we know at this point, Gibson is our moral and philosophical like bellwether in determining good and bad, right? And this name is giving us an indication of, on top of the things that Hadrian is saying, that the chantry is not a good force in the universe.
Yeah.
So he then, after Crispin says, bro, you really cannot be saying this stuff. They're going to throw you to the torturers. He's like, let them. I won't serve them. Let them then. I don't care. And then as they fly away, Hadrian ponders his incoming cryosleep. This is one of those like last part of the chapter statements. The bells are chiming in Devil's Rest on the hour. And this sort of rings like the last time that Hadrian will be at Devil's Rest in his mind and in his life. He's moving into another phase. And the chapter ends with the clock struck 13. So they leave at 1 o'clock, but the clock struck 13 is not by happenstance. 13 is this number that has a lot of meaning. For the Mayans, it was the harbinger of the apocalypse. So maybe that's part of it too, right? Hadrian is kind of the harbinger of an apocalyptic event.
Oh, yeah.
13 people were at the Last Supper. Judas was the 13th. But at the same time, too, on the positive side, 13 is the age that a Jewish boy becomes a man. So this is signifying to us that this is a shift in Hadrian's life as he leaves Devil's Rest for the last time. He is stepping away from boyhood into manhood, and his life is going to change. Now, whether or not that will be an apocalyptic event is yet to be seen.
Yeah. And I couldn't help but think of the opening line of 1984 in this moment. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. It's the opening line of 1984.
That could be it.
Yeah.
That could be the reference there.
Yeah. There's a disorientation with the phrase of the clock striking 13, because it's just something is wrong, something's not right.
It hits the ear strange, right? Ominous.
Yeah. Yes, correct.
But then we move on to chapter 15.
The Summer Palace. That's right. And they get here, and the glaring thing is that Mom doesn't meet them as they arrive.
Yeah.
Just
par for the course.
Par for the course. And it's just like, man, just like striking out at every possible opportunity here, where like it just feels like we can't get a win regarding Hadrian's parents. Very frustrating. I mean, like, I feel like I shouldn't be surprised, but I was still disappointed at this moment reading it that she's still not here.
Yeah, and as they're getting set up in their rooms, Hadrian has one of his, internal monologue moments. Maybe it's narrator Hadrian talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
But they get set up in their rooms, and he's looking at his sketchbook, and then another Gibsonism pops up. Memory betrays most people. Gibson's words echoed back to me so clearly that I could see the man standing by the arched window, back stooped and face withered. It fades, leaving them with dull, soft impressions of a life more like a dream than history, which is then goes on to the rest of the paragraph discusses the idea of memory. Hadrian talks about his memory of Gibson because obviously Gibson's top of mind, but he also makes a note on like scholiasts have this mental trick to be able to take a mental photo and recall it. And Hadrian mentions he doesn't know how to do that, right? So this is another, line item that we should make on the ledger of this account is not a historical account.
Yeah.
Not a unbiased account. And Hadrian also mentions that his memory is faulty. My memory is to the world as the drawing is to the photograph. We got this indication at the end of chapter 6 when they're talking about beauty, right? And like the soul of something, like the photograph and the portrait are two different things. My memory to the world is as a drawing to the photograph. Imperfect, more perfect. We remember what we must, what we choose to be, because it is more beautiful and real than the truth.
Yeah.
I can hear Gibson scoff at that, saying melodrama is the lowest form of art. I never had a rebuttal for that. So like Hadrian just leaves us in the lurch of like, yeah, the scholiasts have this ability to like take mental photographs and have this like photographic memory. I don't have that. I've never had that, but my account is the true account.
And he says even like that no two drawings of like even the same person are the same. Like so it's like he's saying these things as he's giving us an account. We're like, brother, you're telling us you're giving us an accurate account from like over 1,000 years ago of your childhood or something like that. Like this is more detailed than an account I could give of my childhood, and it wasn't that long ago, comparatively speaking. There is something true about the fact that memory is not a photocopy. Memory is reconstructive. We reconstruct memories as we go back to them. We reprocess them. This is why treatment for PTSD works, for example, is that people have, is you bring memories back up, reprocess them, and they get encoded differently when they go back. And so it's cool that Gibson has had this discussion and Hadrian's bringing it up now, but you're right, it's glaring in an account over a long period of time. How many times have you returned to these memories? How much have they been altered? And you dare say that they're true?
Yeah.
They're more real than the truth.
Imperfect, then more perfect. How to make that make sense for me? But not only that, right? So that contrasts with the view that we've had of Crispin up to this point. But it also contrasts with these weird moments that Hadrian has had in these last few chapters where he could have sworn that he saw the events happen before they happened.
Right.
He swore he saw Gibson's nose cut before he actually saw it cut on that stage. And he would swear on his life that he would see it that way. Do we just chalk that up to this memory being faulty and this account being faulty? Or is there something weird going on here? We're left with this huge question mark on why are we to trust your memory at all? If every indication that we're getting, not every indication, but many indications that we're getting is the reality that actually happened is different than the reality that Hadrian is portraying for us. But Crispin is the one that we're interfacing with that the most, at least in this immediate. And then yet again, as he's having this internal monologue moment, this super melodramatic guy.
Yeah.
Crispin comes into the room, and because mom isn't home, mom didn't meet them there, Crispin comes in and says, hey, mom's not here. She hasn't returned back yet or whatever. Crispin apparently had found this out when he went to the harem. So we get this idea that there are 37 concubines in this harem or whatever, the viceroy's harem that's being, maintained at this house or whatever. And he's coming in with having been there already. 15-year-old kid. And being a 15-year-old kid, the first thing is dude, this girl's hips, this blue homunculus, you gotta see him. And the moment that anything about desire or lust or of a sexual nature comes up, Hadrian immediately gets into this shame cycle, thinking about his last encounter with Kyra. That brings that sort of cycle back to him and sort of puts him in this moment of shame. So we need to keep an eye on Hadrian and his relationship with women going forward, because if his brother just mentioning the people at the harem brings this up into him, I have a feeling that that's going to come up again later.
Yeah. And I said this when Kyra's moment happened. I don't know why it feels so refreshing to me to have a a male character that is not like down with the objectification of women. Like he's like,
Yeah.
I don't know what it feels like. Our culture doesn't do that very much. I don't. Maybe they do sometimes, but it feels very refreshing that we have a character who's like, it's like, dude, like, don't tell me about the blue homunculus's hit. Like I don't. He's like clearly
Mhm.
uncomfortable and ashamed by the commentary. You know, Crispin's just doing his regular in the culture 15-year-old thing, but Hadrian is not doing it. It's actually one of the things that I think is straightforwardly admirable about Hadrian in this moment, even if he's been imperfect in the past. That he's just not really down with the harem thing. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
But clearly that's normal for Palatines.
yeah.
As Crispin is a 15-year-old kid just going there, that
Mm-hmm.
would totally be normal according to them. But he finds out that mom is essentially on Euclid, I
Yeah,
guess this other part of the planet. Like she hasn't left planet, but she's somewhere else. And Hadrian asks why. Crispin doesn't know, right? He was, a bit focused on other things. Crispin's playing with a knife and Hadrian takes it and starts sharpening his pencils. And they have this discussion. Crispin says like it's hard to imagine that there's a war going on. And so we get this bigger picture of a hammering home of the idea that the further you are away from a conflict, the less real it seems to be. But it also, I noticed, like points to this escapism. Like the contrast that we've had between Liliana and Alistair are this. Essentially, they retreat into what is most comfortable and what they know with regards to dealing with problems. But in most cases, that's not a healthy way of doing it. In Alistair's view, it's in work, right? The workaholic father who retreats into his work and neglects his fatherly duties and raising his children. Liliana neglects her nurturing duties, being a mom, by constant escapism, right? So she spends most of her time here. She doesn't spend time at Devil's Rest, but even the time that she's supposed to be here, she's not. She's somewhere else. And we get the indication, at least at this point, that Hadrian believes that his mother's just like doing her creative pursuits or, just living this hedonistic life. Just hammers home the idea that neither of his parents are particularly good at taking care
yeah.
of their kids. But then Crispin, in this, again, to the moment, like Crispin trying to connect with Hadrian, asks him to go to the harem with him to see this
Yep.
blue girl, right? Like he's trying to, this read to me, even though it's skewed from our moral insight looking into the story, that like
It's sad.
that's not
Actually.
a normal thing
Yeah.
for like a brother to ask another brother to let's go like have this weirdly objectification sexual moment. I'm sure it happens. I've never gone to a strip club or anything like that with a brother. It would be strange, right? That's a strange thing. That's not a normal thing in our morality. But in his own way, Crispin is trying to have one more memory with Hadrian before he leaves. And I don't think that this next part is Crispin trying to be a jerk. He
No.
mentions the fact that there are also men there in the event that Hadrian is, more into that instead of women. But Hadrian like gets pissed at the idea of like, why didn't he ask me in the last 15 years whether or not like I was gay?
Yeah.
Um,
I'm going to read this paragraph because I think it's important. I also don't read, I actually think Crispin's comment is like, oh, are you into guys instead? I actually think that is like purely morally neutral from Crispin's.
Yeah.
I read like, it's like, oh, you're into guys or something like that.
he's trying to connect and figure out who Hadrian is.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's this couple of paragraphs which starts 15 years and he had never asked, referencing his whether or not he was attracted to men or not. How disjointed the Palatine family is. A cabal of strangers bound by something thinner than low-born families. Not blood, not really. Only our genetic constellation. My mother and father weren't parents so much as donors. My brother and I classmates, acquaintances who happen to share the same base genetic code. I have observed many Palatine families in my life, and almost always it is so. Yet another way, I think, in which our plebeians are more human than we. My brother did not know me. No, thank you. Now I realize Crispin was trying to befriend me, to give us one shared experience before I left forever. I could have proposed an alternative, a hunt to the hills above the lakes, racing flyers. We could have played a blasted sim game even. Instead, I glared and returned his knife hilt first. I feel like this really like wraps this entire first arc of family relationships into like a really neat bow of just like just bringing all the threads together. You know, we've seen family, like father disjointed from son, mother disjointed from son. This really feels like hammering home that even brothers disjointed don't even know if the other person is interested in same sex or whatever. The only thing they have is this like weird, shallow attempt to go to a harem together as the only possible way to connect. It's really sad, actually,
Yeah.
reading this, because I was reading this like, it's like, this is something that we would never do in our culture. We would do something simpler, like try to just get to know the other person, but they don't even have a language for that. And so they
Yeah,
just,
but guys need an excuse too, right? Like, so that,
yeah,
like, and Hadrian even mentions the idea that, like,
we could have done something together.
yeah, anything, like played a game or, I mean, how many times have you played games with your brother just to, as an excuse to do, like, to talk or whatever, right? That happens all the time. Why do you think guys play golf? Why do you think guys do anything? It's as an excuse. I mean, this podcast, right? Why do we need this excuse to talk about these things, Drew? It's
Yeah.
because we're guys. And despite the fact that Crispin is, even though in this imperfect way and with this barrier to their familial relationship that seems insurmountable, Crispin is trying to connect with Hadrian. That's what I got out of this situation more than anything else. And contrasting the same way that, like, Alistair told Hadrian at the end of their last conversation before Gibson was scourged, you were to refer to me as sire. And like the ending of that relationship,
Yeah.
this is the ending of his relationship with Crispin. It's him handing this knife back and saying, no, I don't want to hang out with you.
Yeah.
Which gives us an indication that Hadrian may be more like Alistair than he cares to admit, right? He's like, somebody is reaching out an olive branch to him, although a weird one. He doesn't want to be associated with Crispin. He is cutting off the relationship with Crispin.
He had an
little by
opportunity
little
here. He
And
had
he
an
didn't take it.
opportunity. Yeah. He
Yeah.
didn't have to do it this way. He could
So
have.
definitely a weird vibe going back to this and like feeling
Yeah.
for Crispin a lot.
Yeah.
As he's going through this, albeit in a strange way.
Yeah.
Hadrian gets pissed that, like, it's this really interesting time, right? Like the fact that his mother hasn't left any indication of where she's going to be or whatever.
Well, and she doesn't come the next day or the next day.
Yeah.
It's a continual thing. He's there for days and still doesn't hear from
He has
her.
no indication of where mom is.
And I love this line, which is that I suppose I might have called her, but I was the one who was leaving and wanted to matter enough to her that she would call. Perhaps that was petty, but I'd hoped to have one parent care enough to try.
It's hard.
It's really hard, and it's a really good psychological indication of where he's at. He's openly speaking about the disappointment of this. Sometimes he's just like stewing or something like that, but this is him like really like thoroughly going through it. There's a counselor educator that I think is really interesting. He's got like a show on like Ramsey's thing or whatever. Dave Ramsey. He's Dr. John Maloney, and one of the things that
he's great.
One of the things that he says a lot on his show that I really enjoy actually is this phrase, behavior is a language. It's like, what is a person communicating to me with their behavior? We have to be careful about it because we can make too many assumptions and try to mind read and stuff like that. But we can get a sense of what's important to a person by the way they behave towards us, even if they express something verbally to the opposite. And so you might have a situation where Liliana says she cares about Hadrian, but what he feels consistently from his parents is the absence. And what their behavior consistently tells him is that he is unimportant to them amidst all of the things that they have to do. So while it's technically true he could reach out, he wants to be an important part of their life. And he just doesn't feel like he is for frankly good reasons.
When he says he realized that he could have taken care of these things, he could have called mom, he could have made this, made a moment with Crispin doing something else. That's narrator Hadrian, right? That's not Hadrian in the moment. And it truly speaks to his like depressive mode in this moment. Not only that, like, he feels like nobody cares. The people that should care about him most do not. And the one person that did care about him the most is now out of his life. It's also indicating to us how depressed he is about the future with going to the chantry, right? He just sleeps. He escapes the living world by going to sleep. It's a clear indication to me that he is really depressed.
Yeah.
And it's hard for people that are in that frame of mind to have the wherewithal or the mental capacity to reach out right? That's why, like, if you know somebody who's depressed or struggling with depression, I would encourage anybody to reach out to them because it's very, very difficult for them. They're so locked in to their internal world
Yeah.
and their feelings in this moment, in this negative emotion, that it's very, very difficult to
Yeah.
reach the outside world. So I would encourage anybody, if you know somebody struggling with
Yeah.
depression, to
I
reach
want to
out to
read
them.
this paragraph because I think it's really good. I was having difficulty enduring anything by this point, so I found myself sleeping as much as I could. As I've grown older, I find I need to sleep less, but in those early days, I found it a blessing, a way to escape the worldly indecency of time. Asleep, I could forget my nervousness and the blind terror of my situation. I could forget what I was, not a man, not the Palatine son of a perfectual archon, but a pawn. Whatever my feeling about that literary conceit, it was applicable. On Delos and Medulla especially, I was only an extension of my father, his piece to move. Plebeians rarely understand this. They see wealth and think it is power, but they are beneath the notice of the powerful and so are so often free to make their own decisions, however limited they may be. As my father's son, I was not. Without Gibson's letter, I was trapped and would be sent to Vestred no matter my objections. I wanted to bring that up because I think number one, it speaks to the like sleep as avoidance thing, but it also speaks to a sense of feeling trapped that often generates depression amongst people. When people find that they are in a dissatisfying situation and they don't see a way out, often they feel hopeless and as if their life is going to be essentially unending suffering. And so they sleep. Their everything grinds to a halt. One of, when we're doing risk assessments for suicide, that one of the first questions is, do you ever think about going to sleep and wanting to not wake back up? It's just this feeling of sleep being to feeling like you're not existing, being the place to retreat to or to dream. Or he talks about actually anxiety in this passage too, trying to retreat from the worry about this horrible future he's going to have. When we think that things are bad, and there's no hope for the future, we retreat into bed and never leave. That's what we do. It's actually a pretty good description of like when people feel depressed, the feeling of being stuck and stuff. I was really actually pretty impressed reading over it again. It's like, oh, this is actually a pretty realistic display of not only what a person might think and retreating into sleep, but why they might feel that way. So it's good on Rockio. It's a really good example of this.
It's one of the most apt descriptions of depression and anxiety overwhelming you that I've read in a piece of fiction. And as somebody who has struggled with that in the past, right? Like it's definitely, that is a real feeling. And when Hadrian's expressing that, I mean, it hits home pretty hard for me.
Mm-hmm.
Then he starts doing the right thing, right? Like, okay, then he starts getting out of bed.
Yep.
He goes to exercise, get some sun, right? Things that you would see as sort of antidotes to this feeling. And the moment that he's done with his morning run and he's sweaty, one of the servants comes up to him and lets him know his mother's home and that she has summoned him. And that sort of ends chapter 15.
Yeah.
We move on to chapter 16, Mother.
Yes.
So he immediately goes and visits his mother in his synthetics, hasn't even gotten the time to shower. And he goes into her studio and sees that she is working on her operas. She's wearing this monocle that essentially is this AR device that writes directly to the retina as she's sort of editing and making these things for this, presumably holographs.
It sounds really cool, actually, visually.
Sounds awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the coolest version of an anime studio ever, where she's like editing the thing. It's sort of reminiscent of him walking into his father's office, just like where he's very busy doing things and stuff, and
he makes a note of that. He says, like father, she had so little time for her children. So he sees this as like she was doing opera stuff the whole time or like screwing off. Like and now she calls me the moment that I'm like running and I have to immediately go see her. He's really unhappy with how his mother's treating him.
Yep.
And he mentions to her, like, hey, this isn't cool. Like, I'm leaving in less than a week, right? I've got days here and I've barely seen you. And then Liliana immediately sends her servants away and they begin having a conversation that is a bit more to the point. But before that, he sort of describes her again. We get these images of her in particular, but also his father in the dream sequence. His parents as these sort of statues. right? How sad is it that like his vision of his parents are statues in bronze and marble, not
Yeah.
as like flesh and blood. He sees her as this statue that is immovable and changeable. And then the moment all the servants leave, she's like, "What in Earth's name do you think that you're doing?" And he's just like shocked at the idea that,
Well,
where have you been? What are you doing? You
as
can't criticize me.
as 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 the guards leave, I like that this line is she has this expression on her face that he can't place. It's like he's experiencing something from her for the first time, which may be like either concern or like reasonable anger.
I didn't get that.
It's like I can see the like concerned but angry face of my father in my head, but I can imagine him never have seen that from one of his parents. And he's like, what's going on? She's got this look on her face, and then she comes after him because you know they're having a real moment maybe for the first time because you know like they're in private. So I
We
think
get the
also
indication that this is maybe the first time that they've ever spoke candidly to each other ever.
Yeah, and you know Hadrian's upset at the outset here, but you know she responds differently than Alistair. I mean, she's like when he comes in, she finally notices. Oh, there you are. Like it feels, even though it feels cold because of the context. Like she's been away. It feels warmer than Alistair. So it's like it's an interesting mix of things still. But yeah, she's like,
She then throws this case at him,
yeah,
and Hadrian's like so put off guard, but he grabs the case and then his eyes sort of get wide, right? And he realizes that she's more tapped in than he had thought, right? Because what she's throwing at him is the case with the novel, The King with 10,000 Eyes, the autobiography of Carn Sagara, the ancient pirate, the King of Borgosos, in which is Gibson's letter.
Yep.
So when Hadrian went back to his room after the scourging of Gibson, he saw that that was gone. It wasn't Alistair who got it. It was Liliana. And, you know, he asked her like how you got it. And then he sees that she's got this security room in her studio where she's keeping an eye on, presumably on more than just Crispin and Hadrian, but especially on Hadrian lately, ever since he got beaten up. And so that changes the dynamics of the conversation to 180 degrees, right? Liliana is an ally in the situation, not an enemy. And her actions have spoken to Hadrian that like, I'm taking care of you, even though you don't notice that I am. I did want to notice that like we get a description again of the King with 10,000 Eyes, a purported autobiography of Carn Sagara, who is this ancient pirate and this king of Vorgosos. In the back of the book, Vorgosos is a mythical extrasolarian world said to be the domain of demons and pirates. To keep a pin in that, because you know the indication that we've gotten up to this point is like this is along the lines of like a novel, like Simeon the Red. This is like a pulp fantasy novel that would have been around at the time, but it will have importance later. Liliana then tells Hadrian what Gibson's plans were. She
not impressed.
Yeah, well, not impressed, but also like answers the question that Hadrian had of like, okay, whatever Dad said on the stage wasn't the plan, but what was the actual plan? And essentially we get this indication that Gibson had a connection to a local lord who had a scholiast, and then he talked to that scholiast, and that scholiast had a connection to a merchant or vessel that was going to take him directly to Kros or whatever. But they were seen in doing that, and in their communications weren't careful enough. And then that lord or somebody around that lord turned all that into Alistair, which is why everything fell down the way that it did. As this scholiast like sent transmissions to this ship, essentially, just totally uncareful. But then, you know, going back to your idea of like a totally different reaction than Alistair would have had, Liliana does take a moment to apologize to Hadrian about what happened to Gibson because she knew that they were close.
Yeah.
Hadrian then asks like, okay, have you heard anything about him? And she says, yes, he's going to be in exile, but your father has listed him on like 9 different manifests on 9 different ships,
right,
to make sure that you and I don't find him.
Yeah. I also like that there's some discussion about like, oh, don't worry, like Dad doesn't know about this letter. This is like purely like, I've captured this. And she calls him Al, which is hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
He says like, Al has no
diminutive.
It speaks to like Liliana as a character of like, it's like, oh, this lady's calling Alistair Al. That's crazy to me. There's also this like presence she's described to have. She's like giant, right?
That's where Crispin gets his height, is from
Yeah.
her side of the
It's
family, not
yep. hmm
Alistair's.
Yeah, she like
She's very
towers over
tall,
Hadrian. Yeah.
Amazonian, like beautiful woman who looks no more than like 30, right? According
Yeah.
to, she's hundreds of years old, but doesn't look more than 30. And as Hadrian is like taking all this in and is shaken at the idea of like, well, one, he's never going to see Gibson again. But imagine you being in that situation and you just assuming for the last week and a half that like my life is going to be in the chantry, my life is over. And then in the matter of 20 minutes, all of that gets flipped on its head in one conversation. It's got to be, it's put Hadrian really off guard. And the thing that puts him off guard most is as his mom sees him like this, for the first time in his life, she walks up and gives him a hug. And it's the first time that a parent has ever given him any affection.
In 20 years. Yeah, he's for the first time in his 20 years he has ever been shown physical affection. I cannot even
the only thing he wanted.
Imagine the like distant. It's interesting from thinking about Liliana as well, because if she's wanting to hug him in this moment, I can imagine this hasn't been easy for her either. That there's been none of this relationship with her son, who's 20 apparently. It's like, and it's heartbreaking. It's like a really genuine moment. I'm really, really happy for Hadrian in this moment reading it. It was like, oh, thank goodness we get a win for once on the parent front.
Yeah. Not only that, at that moment, you can sort of just imagine that at that moment, he probably cries. He doesn't say that he cries, but he probably cries. And he just like vomits everything that has been in his mind. This is the moment of relief for him to finally get out all of his inner monologue to somebody else. And that's got to be so freeing to be able to finally talk about all this different stuff. And not only that, to also then hear that his mom wants to help him.
Yeah.
But Hadrian is sort of taken aback. It's like, we don't have time to come up with this elaborate plan or whatever. But then Liliana claps back and says, what do you think that I've been doing? So we get this indication that she has been away, not because she didn't want to see Hadrian this last week. It's actually because she's been planning an escape for him on his behalf, because she's been watching in the shadows this whole time. So she's tracked down a free trader ship, which is the equivalent of a smuggler, right, that we get, with the help of the director Feng from the consortium. And we get this indication that maybe there was like a seduction or like a relationship that his mom has with the director.
Sounds like the smuggler has smuggled for the Lothrians in the past, is what the
yes, yeah. So you can imagine, right? Like that's a good indication of how good this guy is, because if from what we know about Lothrians at this point is if they're a Russian analog and they're a part of this Commonwealth, then it's got to be some sort of analog to the Soviet communist society. And if you can bring things into a Soviet communist society, then means you can get by most things, right? So the plan then is that and we also get an indication that he's Jadian too, right?
Yep.
Which we don't know about Jad yet, but we'll meet a Jadian not too distant future. But this guy has agreed to take Hadrian off planet and to take him to Ducros. Hadrian then expresses, hey, are you sure that you'll be fine from like Dad's wrath?
Right.
Like you're screwing up with his plans. And to another character thing about Liliana, she big mans Alistair. She's like, Alistair doesn't rule this planet. He thinks that he rules this planet and he rules this system. My grandmother does. He doesn't. I'll be fine. Grandma's the viceroy, not him. And he sort of comments, let's read that last piece when he's talking to her about why, like asking why she wants to help him.
Let's see.
Yeah. So after saying that basically the viceroy has Alistair's balls in her hand, right? Like this big manning, this villain that we've had up to this point, Hadrian asks her, why are you doing this? She thrusts out her chin. Al never once asked me about this Vesperad business, so damn him to the outer dark. You're my son, Hadrian. She ran her tongue over her teeth like a bored lioness, her attentions captured by something only she could see. And then she looks at him and says, is this what you want? Life as a scholiast with the core? I cleared my throat, desperate to stifle the swelling of emotion the words, you are my son, had placed in me. Yes. So Not only do we get this indication that we get this first physical affection from his mother to him in 20 years, he also like feels pride and joy in the idea of this lioness, this queen, this like very maternal mama bear figure taking control, asking him if this is really what he really wants, and then supporting him with everything that she has. It's a beautiful end to the chapter. It totally recolors the way that we look at Liliana.
Yeah.
We don't see, she's not perfect, right? She's made mistakes. She was not as involved as she should have been. But maybe she recognizes that, and that's part of where this is coming to a head for her of like, okay, well, now I want to help out my kid. But it's also kind of like getting back at her husband of being like, he never asked me about this. I should have a say in my son's future as well.
I also feel like a serious contrast from you will address me as sire or my lord, or to you are my son.
Yeah.
There's a drastic difference between his parents, even though they're imperfect. Mom is at least treating him with some humanity here in this moment. I also, like it's kind of heartwarming that like, dad was running off doing crazy stuff, thrusting Hadrian into this and never consulted her in the first place. That like, that implies she wouldn't have approved of it in the first place. Like she may have had words with Al about this little plan of his. She wouldn't have approved. So it's heartwarming, and it also feels like we're on the cusp of something really big story-wise, because this means that we have the opportunity here for like us to get off planet. I mean, this is going to be a big thing. We've spent and hung out here for this first section of the story. It feels like we're tying up loose ends almost. We've got, Gibson stuff. We've got a question mark here, but we've had big conflict with dad that's coming to a head. We're about to see what's going to happen. Is he going to the chantry or is he going here? Feels like we're on the cusp now. Is this plan that Liliana is laying out going to work now? Yeah. So we're on the cusp of exciting things. So it'll be good to see what happens.
That's a perfect way to end our discussion on this part of Empire of Silence, and hopefully Hadrian has new hope that has sprung from his relationship with his mother, and hopefully it works out for him. But that's where we will end this episode of the Devil's Rest Book Club. Thank you all for joining us, and as always forward
and always down,
and we will see you next time.
See you, folks.
Devil's Rest Book Club is Cameron Elston and Drew Welty. Today's episode discussed chapters 14, 15, and 16 of Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio, copyright 2018. Empire of Silence was originally published by Daw Books, an imprint of Astro Publishing House, on July 3rd, 2018. Quality editing and original music by Cameron Elston. Find us on YouTube. Contact us at devilsrestbookclub@gmail.com. Devil's Rest Book Club is a production of Disquiet Pods. This episode, copyright 2025, Cameron Elston and Drew Welty. Thanks for joining us, and remember, rage is blindness.